But for anybody who's going to be reading about you for the first time, let's start with your early days. What drew you to work at the intersection of AI and strategy and ethics?
Oh, great question. Um, I don't think it was a conscious choice. I think it kind of just happened. Um, I have always been really interested in working at the intersection of technology's evolution and how users or consumers are using that technology, and then in turn, how that technology is changing based on user need, and then how that changes and sort of the back and forth of
Mm,
that. And obviously then there becomes the question of ethics that goes into that,
mm,
right? Especially around like privacy and consent. What are those rules? What are those guardrails? I think that harkening back to like Web 2, thinking about GDPR and how European legal frameworks called into question privacy and usage rights and legality in a whole new way that we'd really not thought about in the US.
mm,
And at the time, I was working for an agency that was UK headquartered, and had a really significant portion of the business in Europe. So all of a sudden, that was something completely new to think about. And then California followed on with CCCP, which is very similar to GDPR, just given the size of California, the population density. A lot of companies were then sort of like, okay, well, if we had to do it for California, it's just going to apply to the entire US. And so, in that way, California really led the path around legal frameworks for privacy and consent. Um, Alongside that, I became very uh, inspired by the early ideals of Web3 and blockchain technology, especially around privacy. Concepts in Chris Dixon's book, Read, Write, Own, about the ownership of your data,
mm,
about shifting ownership models for what that can look like.
mm,
To that end, I spent nearly a year as the chief marketing officer for a layer one blockchain called Tezos, and then went to Feral File, which was an art specific platform for artists that are using blockchain technology as a medium or material to express their points of view through art to the world. And working with a lot of those artists that I had known for a while, but formally working with them in that way was also really inspiring. And a lot of them are dealing with these questions of ethics and privacy, and data ownership. And this is really, for some of them, very core to their practice. Um, I would point you really specifically, actually, in the direction of an artistic collaborative duo named Operator. Their artistic practice is called Operator. And they have all of their work, a lot of their work, over, let's say, the last 5 years has been focused around this privacy collection and multiple chapters
mm.
within the privacy collection. They are one of many. Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst are another pair. They had an incredible exhibition at the Serpentine in London last year, where they're really thinking through, and they have been for a decade, what it means to own your data. What are new organizational structures for data? And this really then brings me to where we are today with AI, now that this has hit the mainstream cultural zeitgeist. What are training data sets? How is the code written? How are the algorithms written, right? Like these are all questions that people are starting to really ask in a much deeper way than, for example, I recall them asking back in the early 2000s at the rise of Google. Like people, I don't think we're asking these questions in the same way that now with AI they're really
Mm.
thinking about.
Yeah, well, as many more brands race to integrate AI, I mean, like you mentioned, it's hit the mainstream now, and I'm on YouTube for an hour, 2 hours a day, just trying to keep up. It's a full-time job, just trying to keep
It
tabs
is.
on this stuff. Where do you see the biggest tension between innovation and trust? Because you're in the trenches and you're seeing a lot of development, a lot of shifts. Where's that biggest tension?
I think that as you just talked about, it's speed. It's everything is moving so quickly. It feels like ever since COVID, like someone pressed the fast forward button on a remote control and like no one knows where the remote is to make it stop. It just keeps going. Like, oh my God, hit pause.
It's so
So
accurate.
it's like everything moves so fast. And I think every brand I talk to, every person I talk to is like, how do I move faster? How do I go faster? How do I make this more efficient? Faster, faster, faster. Whether it's like
Uh-huh.
researching shampoo in the aisle at Whole Foods to figuring out how to make a Black Friday, Cyber Monday campaign for a brand. It's like efficiency and speed is the name of the game. Um, and this like push to innovate as quickly as possible is unrelenting at this point. And that acceleration and that drive for speed, for efficiency is like outpacing the frameworks themselves that are needed to maintain trust. Like people are not taking a step back and really consciously thinking, does this make sense? Is this what I want to be doing? Is this what I want to be asking? Like, where did this data come from that it's even making these recommendations for me? Like, what
Mm.
is the source of all of this? And how did it decide that like this shampoo is better than that shampoo or this ad unit is better than that ad unit? Like, I think that collectively, there's like a need to take a step back, to press pause, and to really consciously think about like what are we using? Why are we using it? What are the training data sets that are going into it? Is it producing outputs that actually make sense? Like make it make sense. I think that a lot of people are just taking what the AI produces and are like, oh yeah, sure, it must know
Mm.
what it's talking about. To that end, I think that the personification of AI, like we talk about it as a they,
Mm.
and it's like becomes a person, like this creates this slippage where then you think like it has empathy, you can trust it, like it's an algorithm that's written to execute an answer to your prompt based on a training data set, based on the way the algorithm itself was designed.
Mm.
Um, and I think that people forget that. To that end, actually, Anthropic's Claude is a really interesting model because they use something called constitutional AI, which most people don't understand. And so constitutional AI is training based on a written set of human aligned principles that are acting as like its ethical constitution, right? So like the UN Declaration of Human Rights is one of these documents. Like it has these sets of human written documents that act as this ethical constitution that then helps their models reason transparently about right and wrong. And
Mm.
so that forms the code foundation of then how Claude it does its reasoning and analysis for the training data that you put into it. And so to me, it's like it's interesting because it's a different type of moral architecture embedded as a
Mm.
blueprint into the AI that no other large language model is using. Um, and I think that that's really interesting and very different. Another thing that I like to talk about is Grok. Like Grok, most people are not really thinking about Grok's one of Grok's primary training data sets is all X content or Twitter content. And so it's pulling in all of this content based on people's streams of consciousness that they're typing into X every single day. And as a result, if you do use Grok, it's much more colloquial, it's much more informal than something like Claude or ChatGPT. Um, and its point of view, the things that it expresses are aligned to its training data. It's aligned to what people are putting into X on any given day. And so this is where I think people are moving really quickly. This like tension between innovation and trust, to go back to your question, like people are moving so quickly, they're not really questioning what tool am I using? Is it the right tool for the job at hand? What is it telling me? Do I agree with what it's telling me? Like what it's telling me even make sense?
Mm.
And moving that fast, moving faster than the speed of innovation itself winds up breaking public trust breaking personal trust with yourself and your own logic and
Mm,
reasoning capabilities, breaking public trust if then you're a brand and you're putting it out there. Um, when really I think what we need is for people to like take a beat, contemplate what it is that we're using, why it is that we're using it, um, and have a more proactive like stewardship model towards these
mm.
things, rather than just trying to move as quick as the next algorithm shift without a conscious approach to technology usage.
Do you think from a company standpoint, there is a bigger or a wider awareness of this, of the gap? And do you find that leadership or executives are addressing it proactively, or are you finding the opposite?
At at Avenue Z, like at our organization, we have an AI council that's been active since the end of Q3 last year. So like for a year
Mm.
now, I guess. Wow, it's October. It's almost
Time
November.
flies.
Uh,
Like I said, where's the
um,
remote?
um, it's been active for over a year now. It's terrifying to say. And a large part of its remit is to be that steward on behalf of the organization and ensure that we are educating the broader organization.
Mm,
So what tools are we using? What are the training data sets? How is it being used? What are the most effective ways to use it? What are the most effective prompts that we can use? How can we create our own training data sets for our different clients, like with client IQ is what we call it. Like, how do we use that to then be able to layer AI tools on top of it so we can move quickly, but also that we can ensure um, we have the right data going in. We then have human oversight coming out, that it's not just blindly like taking what it's giving us and moving it on to the client in question. How do we create those frameworks? How do we test and iterate with new tools? And so these are all things that we are very proactive in talking about and working on, in thinking about, in doing internal trainings literally every single week about this for all of the different teams. And, here at Avenue Z, we have a PR function or division that has very different needs than like video creation or static image infographic creation. Like we have such a broad stretch of marketing capabilities that the
mm,
tools that we're using, there's some underlying consistency around like Gemini and ChatGPT, but then there are pockets that are using different tools for different functions. And so ensuring that we can drive this framework, usage framework consistently, though the tool changes, is a big part of this.
mm,
Um, when it comes to thinking about like how our clients are using it in other organizations, I think our clients, a lot of them are coming to us to ask for guidance about this. I think a lot of organizations struggle from a problem where like one team is using one thing one way and one team's using another thing another way, and there isn't kind
mm,
of communication. And as a result, um, there can be there's a lot of inconsistency. There's also a lot of potential for data to be used in ways that do not abide by like terms and conditions and legal policies and things like this, which is always really
mm,
scary. And I think that without sort of having an oversight function, a central guiding function, not only that is proactively leading, but is also ingesting recommendations within the organization, in our case also from clients, saying, oh, hey, I got an email about this really cool tool, can y'all please go check this out and like let me know what you think. This sort of ingesting is also a really critical function of this group of people, to make sure that the whole organization is like moving forward on the same path and in a way that aligns with your own values as an organization, your like legal frameworks, your terms and conditions, your compliance documentation. Like there's a lot that goes into this from like a legal and compliance standpoint, but then from a brand values, corporate values, culture standpoint that
mm.
needs to be brought together.
Do you find in the industry as a whole that mm, a lot of companies operate this way as well? And such a way where they prioritize educating maybe their users, having a team dedicated to ensuring that data is responsibly managed. Is there a priority around that in the industry as a whole?
I think the scary answer to that question is no.
Ooh.
Um, I think around data usage, as I mentioned at the beginning, I think like GDPR and CCCP forced that to the fore for a lot of organizations. And that sort of oversight or that those frameworks exist and they need to
Mm,
exist. I think when it comes to then the architecture of how that extends into AI, privacy concerns around AI, usage of AI, how that extends into brand culture and brand values, like I think that's where I think that it's very like a very open field. I
mm,
think you have some organizations that are really thinking it through, and you see that in the headlines with organizations appointing like a chief AI officer, and you see and you hear about this. But
mm,
I would say that in like colloquial conversations with friends and relatives and friends of friends at events or parties or whatever, like the number of people who are like, oh yeah, I just have like a personal chat GPT and I put my company's sensitive financial data in there. I'm like, you realize that's like not confidential, right? Like that's a huge no-no. So I think that it's like very hit or miss.
mm,
And this is one of the largest areas that organizations really need to get on top of quite quickly because the amount of, let's call it rogue activity by employees doing things with the best intentions, but not understanding the ramifications of that, I think is much higher than organizations want to admit.
Do you believe that today's consumers are more forgiving or skeptical of AI driven personalization? You mentioned that earlier, and I don't know. Do you feel like we're more educated now? I'm saying we as as part of the user base. I mean, I'm not in any way like an advanced user, maybe like a more of an average AI user where I enjoy some parts of it. I'm a little scared with some parts of it, but um do you think that people are more educated now about their data, or are they even aware? How aware are we of how our data is being handled?
I feel like that is a hard question for me to answer because I think I exist in a self-selected bubble in which this is a
Mm.
topic of conversation that people are aware and concerned about. But once I step outside my bubble, it's very clear that people don't think about these things to the level that I think about it, my friends think about it, my colleagues think about it. So it's honestly it's a tough question. I think that
Mhm.
when it comes to how consumers are looking at AI-driven personalization in their marketing,
Mm.
um, or content that gets served to them, I think that people recognize when personalization is adding value, like if it's
Mm.
anticipating their real needs, if it's surfacing useful insights, like consumers are embracing it. But I think that when it feels like creepy surveillance or manipulation, there's definitely like you can feel that and you can tell
Yeah.
that, and they push back against that. They reject it. I think that authenticity is at the fore for a lot of consumers, particularly for Gen Z. I think that it's very important. I think that when you look at different generations and how different generations are perceiving it, though, it's also very different. Like I think, let's say over the age of 64, like the understanding of the technology is fairly nascent. The usage of the technology is pretty
Mm.
nascent. And when talking with like parents or friends' parents or things like this, it's more like, oh, I got this really creepy ad. Like, how did they know this? And
Mm.
they're kind of like, they can tell it when they see it and it feels weird, but they don't have the literacy to be able to understand what is happening and why it's happening to them.
Mhm.
Um, but they can tell when it's like weird and off and it's unexpected in like a bad way. I think that Gen Z, for example, is very literate in what is this and why is this happening. And they're accepting of it, as I said, when it's useful, when it's accommodating a real need that they have. But then when it does feel like surveillance capitalism or it feels like manipulation, they're consciously rejecting it and turning away from that, which is then where brands risk alienating those consumers
Mm.
by overplaying their hand or overextending their use of AI into this murky territory. Um, so here, like we work with our brands to think about what is that level of personalization that makes sense, that's not like crossing those lines. Again, this comes down to what is the training data that you're using? How are we using that? What are the taglines or the slogans or the messaging materials that are coming out of that? How do they reflect human empathy and some level of emotional intelligence beyond like human intelligence, but emotional intelligence, um, to ensure that we're not going too far,
Mm.
and that we're helping solve a need without entering into the realm of creepy.
Uh, s- so in the next, I don't know, I'm gonna be generous with my timeline here, maybe 3 to 5 years. I feel like that's so far away considering the what's happening on a weekly basis now. How do you see this evolving? How do you see that balance between responsible AI and innovation evolving in maybe the next 3 years, 3 to 5 years, I'm gonna say.
Mm. I think we're at a really interesting intersection where questions around training data and what is legal, what can be used, what cannot be used, is starting to come to the fore in US courts of law, as well as internationally. The UK has had some of this. Um, the EU is farther ahead at proactively providing some of these frameworks, like the equivalents of GDPR, but for AI. And so I think that we're going to see a lot of ongoing tension between what data can legally be pulled in and what cannot be pulled in, and kind of a
Mm.
lot of these AI companies figuring out that line. And I guess part of my concern is it's going to be like ask forgiveness, not permission, which is a very big problem because once it's in there, it's not like easy to you can't like extract it out of there.
Exactly.
So it's not like you can just delete those lines of code and like that training data
Yeah, it
disappears.
gets a
Like it's
little
in there
tricky.
and you're done. So I think that there's going to be this ongoing friction between these organizations looking at how they can augment their training data sets to continue advancing their AI systems, and then users coming in and actually saying like, no, that's too far. The authors or the creators of those training data sets saying like, no, like I need to get paid for this, or this is not okay. What are the actual technical ways that you can exclude your content from being included in that? So I think that there's going to be a lot when it comes to like innovation and responsibility around the AI providers, the legal frameworks globally,
Mm.
the content creators, and then the users as these like four camps that are all going to be bristling a little bit for wanting the maximum that they can get out of these platforms, wanting the maximum amount of data, the original content producers saying, hold up a minute, like hold your
Mm.
roll. And then the legal courts trying to play catch up and provide frameworks for the future, but then playing catch up for all the things that have happened in the past that now we can't really roll back time.
Mm.
So I see this as being the real place where there's going to be a lot of friction as it continues to evolve. Um, I also see that AI is going to become more and more embedded into your daily experiences, into helping you shop and helping you comparison shop and make decisions,
Mm,
in people being able to vibe code and deploy their own agents to do specific things like repetitive tasks that perhaps they don't want to do.
mhm.
I think that as that moves forward, there's going to be more and more literacy around how these systems work, why they work the way they do, what the training data is, what the content is, and how it's used. And my hope is that this conscious usage of the platforms, conscious conversation around the training data itself, conscious conversation around the code that is underpinning these AI systems, like all of this is going to make for a more literate and
Mm.
aware society that's using and deploying these tools in the best way for the best purposes over the course of time.
Conscious usage, powerful
Yeah.
stuff. Um, at Avenue Z, how are you working with your clients to get them ahead of the curve or to help them better anticipate or navigate such a just ever this ever shifting landscape now with AI?
So we do not use AI tools without having a discussion with the client to say, like, we are using ChatGPT on your account, or we are using Nano Banana on your account, right? Like, this is what we are doing. This is how we are using it. This is where it fits into our strategy workflow or content writing workflow or design workflow, right? And we talk them through it. Um, and ultimately get their buy off on that and make sure that they're okay with our usage of that. And we've had some clients push back and say, like, I don't want you using ChatGPT on my account. I can tell when it's ChatGPT. I don't want that to be used.
Mm,
We talk about creating training data sets that are specific to their previous written content and how those custom GPTs then feed into to create outputs that do not sound like ChatGPT, and kind of walk them through that. We give them examples. We work on iterating that together. But ultimately, there's always the human layer of thinking about the prompt, thinking about the data set, thinking about the potential bias that could be going into it. Then the AI does its work in the middle. um, and again, it could be a brainstorming partner for what are blog series based on trending topics that we could do? What are um, uh, 20 different iterations of ad unit for Black Friday, Cyber Monday, because based on the needs of XYZ creative inputs, based on ABC promos that we have going on. Like it can take a lot of different shapes and forms. And then ultimately, there's always a human looking at it at the end, adjusting things, rewriting things, tweaking things, discussing with the team, going
mm,
back and reprompting the AI as needed to kind of come up with the final solution. And then that is what gets presented to the client, or that is what gets published on the blog or Meta or whatever the platform in question. For us, it's never just like put it into AI, take whatever it produces and
mm,
blindly post it or provide it to the client or whatever. There's always multiple rounds of human feedback, of vetting, of bringing basic intelligence. Is this coherent? Does this make sense? Is this factually accurate? Emotional intelligence. Is this going to resonate? Does this have bias? Is this going to alienate or offend or cause problems? Um, Looking at brand guardrails, does this align to
mm.
branding guidelines to the client's tone and voice? Like, are we off piste? Is this accurate? We're thinking about all of these things, going through these processes before we're getting the final output and providing it to the client. So we're trying to really consciously use AI and use the tools to the best of their ability and use them to help produce more content better and faster for clients, but with this very human layer surrounding it, so it's not just blind.
I love that. Well, sounds like there's a lot of good stuff happening. This
We're
has been
trying.
fun. This has been super fun and informative, by the way. Thank you, Whitney.